When Hollywood's most bankable star stepped into the studio that morning, no one could have predicted the storm about to hit. The man known worldwide for his charm, discipline, and unshakable composure walked in wearing his signature black t-shirt beneath a perfectly tailored gray blazer. The audience's energy surged instantly. Cheers, whistles, camera phones raised. He greeted crew members by name, shook hands, thanked the lighting techs, and even took a moment to sign a coffee cup for a young intern who trembled just to be near him. But not everyone was swept up in his warmth. At the edge of the set, one host sat unusually still, flipping through her note cards like she was sharpening a weapon. The others whispered quietly, sensing her mood. There was an edge in the air, a tension that hummed under the studio lights. When the cameras rolled, the first moments were exactly what viewers expected. Laughter about his new action comedy, playful teasing about his workout routine, a sweet story about his daughters and their dog. Even the stern host allowed herself a faint smile. But it didn't last. She leaned forward, voice low, words deliberate. You've been very successful selling yourself as the American dream, hard-working, wholesome, unstoppable. But don't you think that's a little dishonest? You're not a classically trained actor. You're just a wrestler who made it big. Do you honestly think you belong in the same conversation as the greats? The room seemed to shrink. The audience gasped. His smile didn't vanish completely, but something in his eyes changed, steel replacing warmth. I've never claimed to be anyone but myself, he said evenly. I work hard. I care about the craft. Audiences connect with that. But she wasn't done. Care about the craft. Or care about the paycheck. You've made hundreds of millions playing the same character in every movie. Ever think about stepping aside and letting someone with real talent have a chance? A low murmur rippled through the audience. His hands rested on his lap, fingers locking together tightly, but his voice stayed calm. With all due respect, I've been working since I was 14. Cleaning gyms. Wrestling for $40 a night in high school gyms. Every opportunity I've had, I've earned. If that's offensive to you, I can't change that. The tension was now a living thing between them. Another host tried to defuse the moment. Tell us about that crazy stunt from the movie, the helicopter jump? He began to smile again, describing the scene, but halfway through, she cut him off with a wave of her hand. We've all seen the trailer. Explosions, muscles, big grins. My question is, do you actually think that's acting? The audience's laughter this time was nervous. He turned to her, his voice a shade colder. Entertaining people, helping them forget their problems for a couple hours, that's part of acting. Yes. She leaned forward again, eyes sharp. Or maybe it's just flexing in front of a camera while CGI does the heavy lifting. For a beat, the silence was absolute. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You're welcome to visit a set sometime. See how much CGI it takes to drag myself out of bed at 4 a.m., train for hours, rehearse fight choreography until my body aches. It's not easy, but I respect your opinion. That might have ended it, if she hadn't gone for the final blow. So, when your kids watch your movies, do they think their dad's a real actor, or just a brand? It was the kind of line that didn't just question his career, it went for his family. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze locked on her, the studio lights glinting off the hard line of his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, each word deliberate. My daughters know exactly who I am. They know I'm present. They know I work for them. And they know I don't tear people down to feel big. The audience erupted into applause, loud, long, defiant. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, trying to steer things back to safer ground. But he was already rising from his chair, sliding off his mic, offering polite nods to the crew. Thanks for having me, he said, not to her, but to everyone else. Then, without waiting for a reply, he walked off the stage, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the stunned silence. The cameras caught the last shot, her sitting there, frozen with her cards in hand, and the audience still clapping for the man who refused to be humiliated. The air in the studio was electric. No, suffocating. The kind of tension that made the audience hold their breath without realizing it. Dwayne sat tall in his chair, black t-shirt crisp beneath a fitted gray blazer, his expression calm but eyes locked on the woman across the table. Whoopi leaned back with the kind of smirk that suggested she'd been waiting years for this moment. "Oh, I'm just getting started," she said dryly, her voice carrying over the silent crowd. "Let's talk about your so-called career, Dwayne. Do you ever think about how many real actors you've pushed out of roles because producers know your name sells tickets? Don't you think it's unfair that you've taken up space that serious actors have worked their entire lives for?" The gasp from the audience was sharp enough to cut the air. Dwayne's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist before he forced it to relax. "With respect, Whoopi, I've never taken anything I didn't earn. If a producer believes I bring value to a project, that's their choice. I can't apologize for working hard and delivering results." Whoopi chuckled darkly, shaking her head. "Delivering results," she repeated mockingly. "You mean playing the same guy in every movie? The big charming muscle-bound guy who punches people? Congratulations, Dwayne, you've perfected the art of being yourself." Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure where to aim their lenses. "You know what really bothers me," she continued, her tone sharpening. "You sit here flashing that smile, selling this little fairy tale of grit and determination to people who don't know any better. You make them believe they can be you if they just work hard enough." She paused, eyes narrowing. "That's dangerous." "That's a lie." The silence that followed was deafening. "It's not a lie," Dwayne said at last, his voice lower but sharper. "It's not a lie to tell people they can better themselves. It's not a lie to tell people to work hard and believe in themselves. What's dangerous is telling people they're doomed before they even try. That's cruel." The word cruel hung in the air like a challenge. Whoopi's eyes went cold. "Oh, please. You sit in your mansion with your millions and your private jets and you dare talk about struggle? You're a brand, Dwayne. Not a person. Brands don't care about people. They care about profit. So spare me the humble routine. We all know what you really are." Dwayne leaned forward slightly, his voice now a low growl. "And what exactly am I, Whoopi?" Her answer came without hesitation. "You're a fraud. A walking billboard. A man who's played the hero for so long, you've forgotten what it means to actually be one." The word fraud hit like a blade, slicing through the last threads of his composure. "I fought every single day of my life for everything I've built," he said slowly, deliberately. "If you think that makes me a fraud, maybe you should take a long, hard look at what you consider authentic." The studio was utterly still. The lights above seemed hotter, harsher. But she wasn't finished. "I'm not threatened by you, Dwayne," she said, almost smirking. "I'm just tired of people like you, people who get celebrated for showing up while the rest of us actually work." "I've been working since I was 15, he shot back. "Nothing I have was handed to me. I'm sorry if that doesn't fit the narrative you've built in your head." "Working," she scoffed. "You were handed a platform because you could throw people around in a wrestling ring and smile for the camera. That's not work, that's a circus act." The audience stirred uneasily. "You don't have to respect wrestling," he said, quieter now, "but you don't get to erase the thousands of people who looked up to me because they finally saw someone fight their way out of nothing and make something of themselves." Whoopi waved her hand dismissively. Yeah. The poor kid made good. We've heard it all before. But don't come on my show and preach like you're some kind of saint. You've made millions playing the same dumb brute over and over. Where's the art in that?" He straightened, gaze locked on hers. "Maybe the art is in showing people that no matter where they come from, they can be something more. Maybe the art is in giving people hope when the world gives them none. Or maybe," his tone hardened, "you're just too bitter to see it anymore." The audience gasped, louder this time. For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Dwayne slowly removed his microphone, the sound of the Velcro tearing loud in the silence. He rose from his chair, adjusted his blazer, and looked straight at her. "You wanted a headline, Whoopi? Here it is. I'd rather walk out with my dignity than sit here and trade insults with someone who's forgotten what respect looks like." He turned, nodding politely to the crew and the other hosts, and walked off the stage to a thunder of applause that grew louder with every step he took toward the exit. The last shot before the cameras cut to commercial was Whoopi sitting rigid in her seat, her smirk gone, drowned out by the sound of an audience standing on its feet for the man who refused to break. Whoopi's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin, unyielding line. The warmth that had once lived in her eyes was gone, replaced with something colder, sharp, deliberate. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her voice dropping low but slicing through the air like a blade. "You know what I think, Dwayne," she began, each word deliberate, heavy with accusation. "I think you've fooled everyone. Hell, I think you've fooled yourself. You're not a role model. You're just another overpaid musclehead selling empty slogans to desperate people who don't know any better." The crowd reacted instantly. Sharp inhales, hands over mouths, the kind of sound that comes when an audience collectively realizes a line has been crossed. Anna and Sarah flinched in their seats, their eyes darting between the two like they were watching an oncoming collision they couldn't stop. But Whoopi wasn't done. Not even close. She sat back slightly, a slow, deliberate shake of her head. Then she delivered the sentence that changed the air in the room. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "I even wonder if you're a good father to those girls you keep posting on Instagram. Because from where I'm sitting, you're too busy playing superstar to actually be there for them." The words didn't just hang in the air, they detonated. Dwayne froze, his trademark smile vanishing in an instant. For the first time all morning, his face was stripped bare of charm or humor. His fists tightened against the tabletop, knuckles whitening. A muscle in his jaw ticked, a silent testament to the storm brewing inside. The audience gasped, louder this time, the sound rolling across the studio like a wave. Sarah's hand shot up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide. Even Whoopi's fellow hosts stared at her now, alarm flashing in their eyes as though they just watched her step over a cliff's edge. When Dwayne finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, controlled, but laced with a menace that made the room seem smaller. "Don't you dare bring my kids into this." The words came out measured, but they hit like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Whoopi gave a dismissive little wave, but there was the slightest tremor in her tone now. "Oh, please. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." Dwayne stood. And when he stood, the air changed. The table no longer contained him. He was towering, broad-shouldered, filling the space with a presence that swallowed the studio whole. The gray blazer hung perfectly over his frame, but it was his eyes, dark, unwavering, that made the room hold its breath. He stared down at Whoopi, who suddenly sat a little straighter, her gaze flickering for the briefest moment. "You can question my talent," he said, voice deep and steady. "You can insult my work. You can take shots at my story, my career, my choices. But you do not question me as a father. You do not talk about my girls. Ever." The studio went dead silent. Even the cameras hesitated, as though unsure whether to zoom in on his face or keep their distance. Without breaking his gaze, Dwayne reached down and began unclipping his microphone. The sound of the latch releasing was deafening in the quiet. His chair scraped against the floor as he stepped back, each movement deliberate, unhurried, final. Whoopi opened her mouth, maybe to walk it back, maybe to double down, but Dwayne cut her off with nothing more than a look. A sharp, silent warning that said the conversation was over. He handed the mic to a nearby producer, adjusted his blazer, and turned to her one last time. "You've said more about yourself in the last 20 minutes than you've said about me, and none of it's good. I hope someday you figure that out." And then he walked. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, certain steps toward the studio doors. The audience remained frozen, eyes following him as the weight of his words settled over them. The muted click of the door closing behind him felt final, like the last page of a chapter no one expected to read. Whoopi stayed in her seat, her question cards still clenched in both hands. The smirk she wore earlier was gone, replaced by something unreadable, somewhere between stubborn pride and the faintest glimmer of regret. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to speak or let the silence keep its hold. A woman's voice broke from the back row of the audience, barely above a whisper. "That was too far." Whoopi leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Well," she muttered, her voice uncharacteristically shaky, "I suppose we'll take a quick break." But the crew didn't move. In the control room, producers scrambled in frantic whispers, knowing the clip would be online before the show even ended. Out in the hallway, Dwayne leaned against the wall, shoulders still squared, eyes fixed on nothing. A production assistant approached, holding out his coat like an offering. He accepted it with a nod. "Thanks," he said quietly, slipping it on. His publicist caught up to him before he reached the elevator. "Dwayne, maybe we can." He stopped her with a raised hand. "No. We're done here. There's nothing left to fix." The elevator doors slid open. He stepped inside without another word, the doors closing on his towering frame as the studio behind him tried to pretend nothing had just happened. But everyone there knew they'd just witnessed a moment no one would forget, and one that would echo far beyond those four walls. "Well," she began again, forcing a laugh that rang hollow in the suffocating silence, "you know, things can get a little heated around here sometimes." Her voice tried to land on light-hearted, but it didn't reach anyone. The audience stared back at her, unmoved, as if still replaying what had just happened in their minds. Anna finally spoke, her voice hesitant but clear. "Whoopi, I think that crossed a line." Even Sarah nodded, reluctantly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Whoopi's eyes darted between her colleagues, her jaw tightening as though she was ready to defend herself, but when she opened her mouth, the words seemed to crumble before they left her throat. She looked down at her notes, staring so hard at the cards that it seemed like she was trying to will herself out of the moment entirely. The red light on the camera blinked. The segment dragged toward its end like a slow, reluctant march. Finally, the director's voice crackled in the earpiece. "Cut to commercial." But instead of relief, chaos unfolded behind the scenes. The crew moved in sharp, quiet bursts, resetting cameras, shuffling equipment. The other hosts leaned into each other, whispering rapidly, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Whoopi with a mix of discomfort and disbelief. The audience remained seated, unsure whether to clap, speak, or simply pretend nothing had happened. Outside, Dwayne walked down the hallway without looking back. His steps were steady, deliberate, each one echoing in the narrow corridor. At the curb, a black SUV waited with the door open. He stepped inside, the door shutting with a muted thud that felt final. For a moment, he sat still, staring out at the street beyond the tinted glass. Then, almost mechanically, he pulled out his phone. The Instagram app opened. The cursor blinked in an empty text box. His thumbs hovered above the screen before typing. Lesson of the day: always stand tall, even when others try to tear you down. Especially then. He hit post and set the phone down beside him. Within seconds, notifications exploded across the screen. Thousands of likes, hearts, and supportive comments flooding in. Words like respect, class, and real man appeared over and over. Meanwhile, back in the studio, Whoopi sat rigid in her chair. The next guest was being ushered in, their smile slightly strained as they took their seat. But the energy in the room had changed. It was heavier now, the unspoken weight of what had transpired still clinging to every corner of the set. Even Whoopi could feel it. She shuffled her cards, trying to keep her hands from shaking, her eyes flicking toward the doors where Dwayne had exited minutes earlier. Under her breath, so quiet it was barely audible, she muttered, "Maybe I went too far." The segment wrapped up without incident, but it was clear to everyone, the co-hosts, the crew, the audience, that this wasn't a moment that could be edited away. It would live on, replayed and dissected far beyond the studio walls. That evening, headlines erupted like wildfire across news outlets and social media. Dwayne Johnson walks out of live interview after tense exchange with Whoopi Goldberg. "Don't you dare talk about my kids." The Rock's fierce stand goes viral. Whoopi faces backlash after heated confrontation with Hollywood star. Clips of the confrontation flooded timelines and news feeds within hours, amassing millions of views. Hashtags trended globally. Debates broke out in comment sections and on talk shows about professionalism, respect, and knowing where the line is. Dwayne never issued another public statement. He didn't need to. The world had seen it happen. His silence spoke louder than any interview or tweet ever could. Whoopi, however, found herself under a spotlight she didn't welcome. Criticism poured in from all directions, questioning her judgment, her tone, her approach. And as much as she tried to move on with the next day's show, there was no denying it, that one moment had left a scar on her reputation. In the end, he walked out of that studio with his head high, his dignity intact, and the unwavering respect of millions who watched him choose composure over chaos. She, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of a moment that could never be undone. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to walk away. Fire if you were watching that moment live, Whose side would you be on? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in standing your ground with dignity, share this story so more people hear it.